Welcome everyone. It's 4:03. We have quite a few people logged in. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. We have a full agenda today. So welcome to our public workshop on the San Mateo County's local hazard mitigation plan. I will now turn it over to Dan Belleville for our introduction.
Hi, Hillary. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's workshop. We are looking forward to sharing lots of good information in a short period of time. As you just heard from Hillary, she'll be staffing the chat room. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to answer. If there's references to material or links or whatever, we will be happy to provide those also in the chat. And if you'd like to ask questions, Hillary will either see your hand raised or we'll see the question in the chat box. So thank you for being here. My name is Dan Belleville. I'm with the Department of Emergency Services, and we reside down in downtown Redwood City at the Regional Operations Center. Also with me is Ann Ludwig. She's the project manager and has been helping us shepherd this project through these last 8 or 9 months. Hillary is with the Office of Sustainability and has been instrumental in also helping develop our plan that we'll be presenting today. In addition to the county team, we have Rob Flanner with Tetra Tech, and his team is Cindy Rowley and Art Spencer. They will also be doing presentations. So we're excited to have all the folks here to share their specialties and some of the information that we think will be helpful to you. Before we get started, just want to give you a little background about the LHMPs, they're often referred to as. I've mentioned in many of these workshops before that I've been in the fire service for a number of years before joining the county's emergency services, and LHMPs 20 years ago were pretty much flimsy pamphlets that we put together over a 2-week period addressing some of the emergencies or things that we might encounter in our jurisdictions. They were done independently and jurisdictions did them separately. And they've become pretty robust, as you'll see today, over the course of these past 20 years. We're very excited that this time it's for the first time ever in this county, we're identifying as a multi-jurisdictional, meaning we have a lot of entities, which we'll talk about in a moment. And throughout this process, we really hit almost every corner of the county. We hit all the different groups that live in different parts of the county, whether they represent the Latin groups or seniors, the coast side, the bay side, the north, the south, people from different disciplines. We established a core planning team and a steering committee. So we have lots and lots of collaboration from throughout the county. And I'll talk about more of that in detail as we go through the slides. So Hillary, before we get into the presentation, why don't we go to the slide with the agenda? We'll talk a little bit about that. So after my presentation, I mentioned that Rob will take the lead on sharing the mitigation plan and some of the details of it. Rob does a terrific job of taking a pretty complex document and all of the contents in it and sharing it so that everybody can better understand it. Cindy's going to walk us through her specialty along the way and talk about some of what the features of this plan has. And then we'll go into some of the implementation of it with all the various components, and my partner, the project manager, will take that piece of it. And again, along the way, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or share it in the chat. Okay, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Hillary. Okay. So what is the mitigation planning process? We do these every 5 years. Our last plan was done in 2016. And really the idea of it is it's an effort that's structured by FEMA to assess the hazards that we have throughout the county, and then to try to identify those mitigating actions. And so each of the jurisdictions may have a certain set of interests that they have within their jurisdiction to address those things, so that as the plan gets identified and submitted to both Cal OES and FEMA, we have a process for making ourselves eligible for grants or support in whatever fashion we might be able to get it. The actions are meant to reduce the level of injury and property damage, and then also, of course, the community disruption throughout the process. And then most importantly is we're trying to build resilience for all of the communities in the county. And again, we mentioned the multi-jurisdictional. And along the way, I mentioned that we're ensuring that we have equitable representation, this time, hitting all corners of the county, as I had mentioned before. And then really, I think to capture this, it's really, as I described, 20 years ago, we're shifting from post-recovery and dealing with the incident to pre-planning and mitigation. That's really the key in what I have seen in all these last 20 years. Next slide. So here's a simple kind of mitigation wheel. There we go. And sort of the new piece in here is on the left there. You'll see that in the orange color, the mitigation. In the past, we would try to prevent something from happening, like a fire. We would do vegetation management, and we would prepare for an emergency. And along the way, there might be a disaster. So I'm working clockwise here. And then ultimately, when that disaster would hit, there would be response and recovery. What we're really focusing on now with this plan and with the collaboration of our partners is mitigating these hazards before they come. And it's really important. So an example might be that a number of years ago, folks might remember after the Northridge earthquake and some other earthquakes in the state, that Caltrans had a concerted effort to strengthen the overpasses and the flyovers throughout the state. There's a lot of work being done, especially here in the Bay Area. And that's the type of thing that we're looking at, is trying to identify those hazards, in this case, Caltrans statewide, and make sure that we don't run into what happened in Oakland, where there was pancaking and significant overpass failures as a result of those earthquakes. And then as far as the current, taking a current example, we are trying to address our fire hazard risks throughout the county. Of course, we had the CZU fire last year. And in this week alone, I've had a number of different meetings to the Department of Emergency Management to address those fires. So it is one of our mitigating efforts, obviously, from the county and from a number of jurisdictions. So we can talk a little bit more about that. So taking a past one like the overpasses with Caltrans, or the current one like we are addressing the fire hazard, are a couple of examples that we're trying to achieve here. Next slide. So the benefits of the hazards, you can see those up there. Obviously, I think it's important for a lot of people to take advantage of grant funds that may become available. We'll talk about that as well. It makes ourselves more eligible for these projects if we identify where they are. And it improves the understanding of the risks that we have. And there's all kinds of risks throughout the county. We've had slides, we've had fires, we've had earthquakes, we've had tsunamis, we've had plane crashes, we've had all of these things over the years throughout the county. So it's not like these things don't happen. They certainly do happen. I've been on a number of these incidents myself over the last several decades. So we are familiar with them. They will happen in the future, and we're trying to do our best to be prepared for them as they come up. I think one of the single most important things is the last bullet there, fostering collaboration. It seems to me that one of the things that's sort of stamped into our DNA in this county is the collaboration between local jurisdictions and the CBOs and all of the entities throughout the county. And I think that this multi-jurisdictional plan is a testament to that collaboration. You hear about other counties going it alone or cities going it alone. Over in this county, in San Mateo County, we have this amazing collaborative effort. And this was no exception putting this plan together. So for me, I think it's one of the most unique things that we have is that we work together to put this plan together in a short period of time and make ourselves hopefully eligible for some of this funding. Next slide, please. So who participated? Well, a lot of people. So for the first time ever, and again, I'll talk more about this, all of the cities and towns in the entire county participated. So that really is, again, a testament to what I just mentioned a moment ago about the collaboration. So all the cities and towns and the county itself make 21 partners. And then we had more annex partners this time, making it a total of 36. So it was everything from water districts to fire districts. You can see that list of special districts on the right-hand side. So this does represent a number of different interests. Equity across the board was part of it. We're getting folks from all ethnic backgrounds. And as you can see, it's part of the reference that I made in that first opening moments about hitting every corner of the county by having all these groups partner up with us on this effort. Next slide. So what does the success look like compared to the plan 5 years ago? We've seen some significant improvement. So in 2021, we have 36 partners this time. In 2016, we had 29. And as I mentioned, we have all cities and counties, townships this time with the county. Last time we had 18. And if you look at the third bullet down, we had 2,000 survey responses compared to 200. So 10 times that amount. So that's pretty significant improvement in terms of getting surveys out and responses from the community members throughout, hearing what they think is important to them, and capturing that information and making sure that it's built into the plan. So it's not just the cities and towns and the special districts. We're hearing from the people in the community. And as you can see there, it was a pretty significant improvement. In 2016, we had 500 mitigation actions. This time we have 700. So it's a very robust document. Anna's sitting in the other room, and we got printed copies of it today. And we were teasing about what we could do with the volumes that are as thick as they are, capturing all the information that all of us as the 36 partners developed. Next slide. And then, so the emphasis on the equitable participation was really, really paramount to us this time. And there was some concern along the way that FEMA wouldn't recognize this. And we think that there's been a significant transition in at FEMA to recognize equity in those vulnerable communities. So Hillary, especially, and some of the folks on her team did a lot of work in this area to identify those folks in special vulnerable areas, whether there be language issues or their age or their income. And so we did a lot of collaboration with our groups that we'll talk about in a moment to reach out and seek and protect those that are vulnerable throughout the county. And there's some pretty significant disparities. If you take a look at the folks on the Bay side versus some of those in the remote areas of the county on the coast, there's some pretty significant issues for those folks and what they have to deal with. So once again, we've tried to make this a very, very important part of this project, incorporate those interests, those needs, and try to meet those in the future so these folks aren't left out as they have been in the past. Next. And then using our community-based organizations, again, we reached out to our Latin community. We've reached out to folks that are, in those areas that are vulnerable, as I mentioned. In doing so, we had 20 events that we delivered, and over 600 people attended those events where they could ask questions, learn about the plan, where we're at, and where we're going with it, and what it can do for them. And then we had a pretty significant effort from our information department to reach out through social media. And as you can see there, 30,000 people were reached on the social media. So that's a powerful tool now that wasn't as effective only a few short years back. So these CBOs that worked with us in the development of the plan were instrumental in working with us to further reach those people in those communities that are underserved or that have been left out in the past. Next. And so here would be like an example of some mitigation efforts that we will do. And we're just using the wildfire. So let's go, I guess we'll go clockwise from the upper left. So we could reach out to our Spanish community, if there was a wildfire situation like we had with CZU last year, and we would use our trusted CBO organizations to make sure that those folks knew that they perhaps would be in harm's way, that they might need to evacuate. We'd be able to speak their language so that they are included in helping us deal with a wildland fire situation. And then as a matter of fact, yesterday, if you look at the green sign in the middle, it says the well-publicized evacuation route. So part of the mitigation is we have a product called Zone Haven. Maybe many of you have heard about it. And it is a tool that we are using with our emergency alert system to get people to evacuate, because that's one of the more important elements of wildland fires these days, getting folks out even before getting fire resources in. And so we had a meeting yesterday to identify and define and make more detailed maps for evacuation. So how we might get people from the coast over to the bayside or north or south and away from the fire. The third one on the right there, the multilingual text alerts. We just had a meeting 2 days ago where our alert warning system is going to be replaced with a new system that has a significant improvement in multilingual capability. And then if you look on the lower left, training and emergency preparedness, obviously in different languages, how people can stay safe using CERT programs, all of this was included in the plan. And on the right, the defensible spaces, we just, I had a meeting 2 hours ago on a new grant that just came through in terms of mitigating some of the priority vegetation removal projects that are high priorities in the county. So just this example alone, we've done a number of efforts this week alone that'll be documented and are already documented as part of the important mitigation efforts that we're taking in the county related to wildfire. Next slide, please. And I have trouble seeing this slide, so maybe I'm going to pass to you. If you could take a look at the calendar and share it with the folks in terms of next steps looking at August.
Sure. Yes, so this shows our path beginning in February when we had our kickoff meeting to identify the partners who would ultimately participate in the multi-jurisdictional plan. And we continued that planning effort from February until the end of July. During that time, we also were implementing our outreach and engagement strategy that Dan just described. And it included workshops, media releases, our work with our CBO partners, and a lot of social media messages as well. So here we are in August with our little red circle, and we're reviewing the draft plan, our workshop today, to tell you a little bit more about how to go about reviewing the plan and submitting comments. Our public comment period closes on August 23rd, and very quickly after that, no later than August 31st, we have to submit the plan to Cal OES and to FEMA for their concurrent review of the plan. They have up to 90 days. We're hoping it'll be a little bit less, but they have up to 90 days to review that plan. And then following the plan, we'll be going to the Board of Supervisors, and all of the planning partners will be going to their respective boards for adoption of the plan. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of where we've been over the last several months and where we're going through the end of the year. And later in the presentation, we'll give you some information about how we'll be maintaining this plan over the 5-year life of the plan that we are reviewing today.
And then I think it goes without saying that pretty extraordinary to have such a deep and well thought out, well planned and well documented plan over a very short period of time. You know, just really in 2021, the months that we've had so far, these 8 months have been pretty remarkable. So a great job by so many people. I can't even begin to thank the special districts and the cities and towns and the folks in the county, from Public Works to Ann as a project manager, Office of Sustainability, and there's just so many people that contributed, the community-based organizations. Everybody just did an amazing effort coming together. So thanks for sharing that calendar. Hillary, I think that brings me to the last slide. So do we have any questions or hands raised?
I don't see any hand raised, but we can pause for a moment and see if there's any questions.
Okay.
And I haven't seen any questions come in the chat so far. I'm not seeing anything at this point. If anyone has questions as we continue, raise your hand and ask them in the chat.
Yes, please do. So Hillary, that concludes my presentation. So I think I will now pass it over to Mr. Flanner with Tetra Tech.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Rob.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully we'll make this short and sweet and go over what we need to do and how to review this plan. It is a very, very comprehensive document. It's going to be in the long run, it's one of the largest multi-jurisdictional plans in the state. I believe you're running a close second, Dan, to Contra Costa County. I think they're at 38. So between you and Contra Costa, you're probably the two largest multi-jurisdictional plans in the state and in the top in the country. So anyway, so what we want to talk about is the plan format. Okay, it's a big, large document, and multi-jurisdictional plans are a challenge because we're trying to meet DMA or Disaster Mitigation Act compliance for, in this case, 35 or I think it's 35 or 36 jurisdictions. And so we have to lay the plan out in a certain way that does it. So it's what we call the 2-volume approach. Volume 1 includes everything that applies to everybody. So that is the description of the planning process, the hub of the wheel of this plan, which I like to refer to as the risk assessment. It's a real important part. We are trying to reduce risk with proactive mitigation actions. So you can't reduce risk if you don't know what risk is. So that's in volume 1. The goals and objectives. This is a singular goal plan. In other words, a singular set of goals applies to everybody. So it's not like each jurisdictional partner came up with their own goals. We facilitated a set of goals for everybody, and it applies to everybody, and that's all contained in one, volume 1. And then there are a set of countywide actions. These are actions that benefit the whole. There tend to be more overarching actions as far as, communication and outreach and maintaining a website and things like that. And then Ann will go over after our presentation here, the plan maintenance strategy, which is a real important part of keeping the plan dynamic. It is not San Mateo County and its planning partners' intention for this plan to go sit on a shelf. It will be a dynamic, living, breathing document, and that is all scripted by a strategy. Then when we get to volume 2, everything in volume 2 is everything that's jurisdiction specific. So I said we have 36 planning partners, and those 36 planning partners, each and every one of them have a chapter in volume 2. And that's where we get into what we call the jurisdiction specific components, where each jurisdiction was asked to profile itself. They were asked to complete a core capability and capacity assessment. It's really important that everybody understands what their capabilities are to implement the actions in this plan. Everybody ranked risk as it pertains to itself. Risk, this is a multi-hazard plan, and risk varies by jurisdiction. It can actually vary within a jurisdiction based upon where the extent and location of the hazard is. So everybody went through a process to rank that risk and see what those impacts were. And then lastly, the jurisdiction-specific action plans are all contained in volume 2. So if you live in a certain city, you want to know what your city is saying that they're going to do based upon the risk, you can go to their jurisdictional annex and see how the risk ranked within that jurisdiction, and then what actions did each jurisdiction identify to address that risk. So that's all contained in volume 2, and there are, both volumes have appendices and annexes, or appendix that have supporting information. There's a lot of technical information in both volumes. There are really informative appendices that are part of them. So I encourage you that if you're not finding something, always look to an appendix. So now I'll kind of go to explain to you how volume 1 is laid out. It's broken down into 3 parts. The very first part 1, goes through the background and the methods that kind of explain the process, the what we call the process-oriented aspects of the plan. It's really important to note that this is a process scripted process as far as what FEMA requires. It's not really about what's in the plan. It's the process we went through to put what's in the plan. So that's all explained in part 1. So you'll see an introduction. It kind of goes over the changes in the planning area and what changes were made to the plan. So we have to actually reconcile any differences between the 2 plans. You'll see that in chapter 2. The methodology, the plan development methodology. This is where we really talk about the process and the core planning team, the steering committee, how we organized our partnerships, what is a planning partner, how we define planning partner participation. Then we get to chapter 4. There's a whole profile of the entire operational area, the San Mateo County area. Gets into demographics, lays out the various aspects. There's a geology section, climate, demographics, and kind of profiles the whole area. Chapter 5 identifies which hazards of concern we're actually going to be talking about in our risk analysis. And then Chapter 6 is a really important part, supports the capability assessments, where we do a review of the relevant laws and programs that can support or enhance the outcomes of this plan. And these are broken down into federal laws, state laws. The local laws are all assessed and analyzed in each jurisdictional annex in volume 2. That's where the local capabilities are assessed. So that's the breakdown of part 1. Then we get into the part 2, which gets into the risk assessment, and that's probably the most technical, comprehensive part of volume 1. We have assessed the following natural hazards. This is emphasizing natural hazards plan, because that's what FEMA requires. So we're actually doing assessments on climate change, dam failure, drought, earthquake, flood, landslide, sea level rise, severe weather, including atmospheric rivers, heat, fog, thunderstorms, and wind. And then there's a profile on tsunami and wildfire. So each of these are a chapter, and those chapters are all contained in part 2 of the plan. The profile on climate change, there's a climate change impact where we look at, now we have taken sea level rise and treated it as a standalone hazard for this plan. And I apologize, my dog is barking, but we're treating sea level rise as a standalone chapter because of the obvious impacts of sea level rise. There's 2 exposures in San Mateo County, a bay side and a coast side. And so those are important aspects. So all the other potential hazards have a discussion of the potential impacts from climate change. So what we've done is we said, how do we think flood would change? How do we think heat's going to change? How do we think earthquake, dam failure? So there's a profile of all those in what we call the climate change profile. When we look at each, and then at the end of the chapter, we wanted to acknowledge the non-natural hazards that can impact this area. And once again, I can't stress enough, FEMA does not require these plans to address anything but natural hazards. So this is an optional component where San Mateo County said, we want to acknowledge that these other non-natural hazards can impact the planning area, but these are not fully assessed, right? So when you look at the assessment for a flood or an earthquake, we're not doing extent, location, warning time, exposure analysis, vulnerability analysis, all those key components. We're just profiling these non-natural hazards. And so the non-natural hazards we're profiling are public health, terrorism, cyber, communication failure, hazardous materials, pipeline and tank failure, and aircraft incidents. So the real important part of this is we get to acknowledge what other programs exist in the county to address these non-natural hazards. So it's a real important piece of that. And then at the end of the profile chapter, we do a county-wide risk ranking, and that's where the concept of risk ranking is introduced. We have a quantitative method that looks both qualitatively and quantitatively at the data and assigns a numeric value for impact. We do that because we have to compare the impacts of one hazard to another so that can inform action planning, because FEMA mandates that each jurisdiction identify actions that address the hazards of the highest impact. So that we can compare one hazard to the other, we've come up with a risk ranking scheme, and that's all explained in part 2. For each hazard that's fully assessed, which are the natural hazards, that's those 12 hazards I showed you the slide a while ago, we have broken down the assessment into these components. So at the beginning of every chapter, there's a general background of the hazard. What is a flood? What is a wildfire? What is a landslide? What are types of earthquakes? These are all profiled in a general background. And then we go and take a deeper dive, and then we profile each hazard by looking at past events. How often has it occurred or can it occur within the area? The location. And when I say location, when we say location, we mean extent and location. So how far does it extend? Some hazards have a clearly defined extent and location, like a floodplain, like a wildfire severity zone where you have, steep slopes and vegetation. Some hazards don't have a clearly defined extent, like heat. Yeah, there are maybe heat maps, but heat can impact an entire area. So some hazards have a clearly defined extent and location. If they did, we mapped them. Okay, so you'll see flood maps, earthquake maps, landslide maps. There's a lot of maps in this plan, especially in volume 2. So that's the location. Then we get into frequency. how often does it occur historically or probabilistically? And some hazards we can do probabilistic determination based on models. You know, FEMA maps a 100-year flood zone. A 100-year flood zone is a flood zone that has a 1% annual chance of occurring in any given year. Or there's probabilistic earthquake areas. So we try to associate a frequency with every hazard. Then we look at the severity. How bad do we think it can get? And when we say severity, that could be a myriad of things. Severity in flood is depth and velocity. Severity in earthquake is expected ground motion. Severity in wildfire is slope, vegetation, and climate. So we try to associate the severity of each hazard based upon the metrics that are typically used to do that. And then we look at warning time. You know, how much warning does the area have for each of these specific hazards? After we've profiled them, then we're required to actually look at the exposure. And when we say exposure, we're looking at the exposure of the people, the property, and economy and environment, our people, property, and critical facilities and environment within the planning area. So this is what we call assets, and we identify assets, we inventory those assets, and we look at the intersect of the asset with the hazard area, and that's what we call an exposure analysis. Then once we identify what's exposed, then we're required to try to estimate what we think would happen if an event happened. This is what we call a loss estimation or a vulnerability analysis. And we're using models for this. There's a model platform that FEMA has, it's called HAZUS. And HAZUS has the ability to model and estimate loss using what we call damage curves and damage correlation. And so we've for those hazards that we can model, we've made a loss estimation. So there's a lot of really interesting information and detailed information in here on what we expect could happen from scenario events by actually estimating loss. Then lastly, we look at future trends. We look at the development trends. And so we want to look at the spatial extent of the hazards, and are these in areas where we're projecting growth? You know, that's something to be aware of. If we're expecting a lot of growth in an area where you have a lot of risk, how are you going to manage that risk as the growth intersects that? So we look at development trends. This is a lot of dealing with, development, your land use plans. This is where we look at what the general plans and the land use plans identify for growth areas. And then we actually identify a scenario. What do we think is the worst case scenario? And then after we identify the scenario based on all the analysis, what issues did we identify based upon the analysis? So every section in the hazard profiles has an issue section, or what we'd call problem statements. These problem statements should lead to hopefully actions. And as we look at the action plans, are we addressing the problems that we identified in each hazard profile through proactive actions? So that's kind of the layout of each hazard profile as you're looking at each hazard profile. Then when you get into part 3 of volume 1, part 3 is where we get into what we call the action planning steps. Okay, so the very first part of part 3 will be what we call the goals and objectives of the plan. And this is where we've identified the vision for the plan. The vision are a series of guiding principles. We've identified goals that will strive to achieve those guiding principles. We've identified objectives that meet multiple goals. And those objectives, what we call our performance objectives, then are being used to actually prioritize the actions. So we want multi-objective actions. So we've established what we call linear planning components, and they all directly support each other, but they're not subsets of anything. They all stand on their own merit. FEMA requires that we have to identify a comprehensive range of alternatives. Not only are we supposed to identify the action, we're supposed to identify what other alternatives could be considered in support of the preferred alternative. So what we have provided is what we call a mitigation invest management practice catalog. And what we've done is provided by hazard a series of actions that everybody could consider as far as implementing the actions by scale. So there's what we call local, private scale, personal scale. What could John Q. Citizen do? Corporate scale, the corporate community, business communities, what could they do? And then what we call local scale. And we look at reducing exposure, reducing vulnerability, and increasing capability. So this represents the canvas of what possible actions could be applied to address the problems we've identified. So that's all in that risk management practices section. And then, like I said earlier, there are a set of countywide actions as far as countywide mitigation actions that have come up. These are holistic, overarching actions that can actually support the entire area. They're not specific to a certain jurisdiction. They're area wide. I believe there's 6 or 7 of them. And once again, more overarching actions that benefit the whole. These have all been prioritized and will be maintained with the planned maintenance strategy. And then last but not least, the planned maintenance and implementation strategy is included in, and we'll go more into that at the end of the session today, but that's all contained in part 3 of volume 1. Here's just kind of an overview. I believe it's 6 countywide actions. You'll see that these are all laid out the same way. It's the same action plan matrix that each jurisdiction did. But once again, these are actions that apply to the entire operational area, and they benefit the entire partnership. Very high level overarching types of actions. You'll notice that we can actually break them down into 1 website action to maintain a website, 2 outreach related actions, 2 GIS geospatial actions, and then a grant coordination action, so that these are actions that everybody can work together, and these actions all benefit the whole. The planned maintenance matrix, once again, Ann's going to touch more on this, but we actually have to script how we're going to keep this plan dynamic. So this is a required component. This is a real important matrix where monitoring, progress reporting, we're proposing a CRS subcommittee that will convene annually. CRS, community rating system. Several of our communities participate in that program. There are certain requirements those communities have as part of meeting their participation requirements. Those jurisdictions are going to coordinate and roll up progress reporting through a coordinated effort. We have to script what's going to trigger a plan update. We know that this plan has to be updated every 5 years, but there can be triggers for other updates. If a major disaster declaration, for example, happens in San Mateo County, and it's a major event, and it caused a lot of damage, that in itself could trigger an update. The last row is probably the most important. How will the county and its planning partners continue to keep the public apprised of this plan's implementation and ongoing maintenance? So there's a strategy in here about how they're going to utilize the planning, the public participation platform that was set up for this plan, and leverage that and continue to do so through the implementation. So we're not done engaging the public. The public will continue to be apprised and kept apprised of what this is. And then last but not least, the plan integration. It's really important. There's a lot of really, really good information in this plan that can support or enhance other plans' outcomes, such as the general plan, emergency operations plans, climate adaptation, climate action plans. There's a lot of really good information that this plan can support or enhance, and FEMA wants to see how the planning partnership is going to strive to keep that integrated. We always get asked this: why so much detail? I mean, this plan, when it's all said and done, it's approaching 1,100 pages. Volume 1 by itself is like 300 or 400 pages. Volume 2 is over 700 pages. Why does it have to be so comprehensive? Well, it's because it's scripted. One of the things that I have to do when I submit this plan is fill a plan crosswalk. This crosswalk has over 26 elements that I have to show that each and every partner met that requirement. It's required by the law, and the law is, Public Law 106-109, Section 201.6, 44 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, and it literally prescribes what and how each component. To meet these requirements for 35 or 36 jurisdictions is a heavy lift. There's a lot of information that we have to do, and we have to crosswalk this for all planning partners seeking compliance of the plan. And both FEMA and the state must agree on these crosswalks, which is not always an easy task. So it's comprehensive for a lot of reasons. And one thing I can say, I've been doing these plans for a long time, and the early plans were not this long. The later the plans have come, they've evolved because they constantly ask for more. and why this, why that, how did this happen, how do we do this? So when you look at the crosswalk and what the crosswalk requires, and this is just an example of the screenshot you see here, does the planning document the planning process, including how it was prepared and who was involved in the process? I have to tell them for all 35 planning partners or 36 planning partners how this element was met. Well, I have to be able to point to where that element was met in the plan context. So for that, you think about the scope and scale of this plan, that's a huge lift. So that's why so much detail, that's why so much content. Now, because it's so big, what we've done with volume 2 is we've broken it up into pieces. There's no, I mean, the file, a fully assembled file for volume 2 is almost 350 megabytes. You would not be able to download and access that in a web-based environment. So to make it accessible in a web-based environment, we've broken it up into pieces. We've broken it up into 5 pieces. So volume 2A is the planning partner annexes for San Mateo County and all municipalities from Atherton to Daly City. Okay. Volume 2B are the planning partner annexes for the municipalities East Palo Alto to Pacifica. Volume 2C is the planning partner annexes for all the municipalities Portola Valley to Woodside. And once again, these are alphabetical. So, going A to Z, Portola Valley to Woodside. Volume D, 2D is all the annexes for our special purpose district planning partners. So, once again, this is plan covers all local governments, and FEMA has defined a local government as a city, a county, a tribe, a state, or any special purpose district that has junior taxing authority. So all the district annexes are volume 2D. And then there's a suite of appendices that have really important information, like the progress reporting form. What's a progress report look like? That's in an appendix. And the jurisdictional annex instructions and how did each jurisdictional annex get assembled and what were the requirements for each? Those are in the appendix. So there's some really important appendices that are all contained in 2E. So we've broken up that size to make it more readily accessible. And there is a crosswalk with where these are. When you go to the link, you'll be able to see, okay, I want to go look at my city. I know I got to go to 2A. So we've set up a Survey Monkey for how to comment. And if you want to provide us comments, when you go to the plan, you can go into the Survey Monkey and it's by section of the plan. So if you want to provide a comment on volume 1, chapter 2, there's a predetermined place in volume 1, chapter 2 in a Survey Monkey. You don't have to fill out every section. If you only have a comment on a certain section, you go to that tab, you open it up, and you can provide us comments. What we will be doing is tracking those comments as we receive, and we've already been receiving them. The plan was posted on August 5th, and believe it or not, we've been getting comments already, and we are tracking those. And if you want a response, you can tell us, and we will respond based upon you telling us you want us to respond. The public comment period, like Ann said earlier, ends on the 23rd. Okay, so close of business on the 23rd. We will close the Survey Monkey, and the opportunity to comment now will end. Now remember, there's an ongoing public comment process and an ongoing effort to keep this plan dynamic that will be ongoing once this plan is approved and they're in the implementation phase. But so that we can get the plan submitted to the state and get it approved and adopted, the public comment period will close on the 23rd. Okay, so please send us your comments no later than close of business August 23rd, and then we're going to process and get this plan ready to submit on that target date of the 31st. Okay, before moving on to questions, there's some really cool tools that have been created that are part of our ongoing public engagement strategy that are going to be mission critical. And I'm going to stop sharing and hand over the mic to my colleague, Cindy Raleigh, who is going to show you some really cool tools that we've created that will help the implementation and administration of the process. Cindy, take it away.
All right, thank you, Rob. All right, good afternoon, everyone. And are you able to see my screen well? Everybody?
Yes, we can.
Rob, you can see my screen? All right, great, thank you. Okay, so where I'm at is the county website that's got the information for the local hazard mitigation plan. So I'm going to scroll down on the page. And when Rob went through the 3 different parts of the plan, I noticed, I think it was Nancy asked a question on whether you could overlay different hazard layers. And so what you can do is go to the website, and you can click on this link that says multi-jurisdictional LHMP mapping tools and hazard risk data. And what that's going to do is bring you up to an interactive version of really what the results of part 2 that Rob went through. So what I'm going to go through is just to show you the tools and show you how to navigate through the tools. I'm not going to dive too deep into the data that was used or any of that stuff. That all that information is located in part 2 of the plan. It identifies all the data sources. It identifies all the different methodologies used to be able to show you these different hazard layers in an interactive format. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start first. So you've got where you open up is you see this hazard mapping tool introduction. And what this is this allows you to go through every single hazard layer that we have quantitative spatial data for. And we will be able to load all the different hazard layers. And so you can load those, you can look at an address. But what I want to do is start at the beginning and show you where you can actually access each of the individual hazard layers before you get to the big hazard mapping tool. So you'll go down here and you'll start at the hazard risk data. And this is going to bring you to a page that has all the different quantitative hazards that we have assessed and evaluated. So I'm going to start here with Rob talked about sea level rise. And so you're able to go through, and we've got a little bit of a text description that defines what the sea level rise data is and where it was accessed from and where you can find additional information. So for each of these different links that you can go through, you can actually go and you can add some additional hazard data if you want to. You can go and look at the different where social vulnerability layers fall within these different hazard layers and the overlay. You could overlay some of the different supervisorial districts if you wanted to. And you can turn on and off the different sea level rise layers here. You can zoom in and out. You can actually put in an address if you want. I just have one standard address I've been using, but you could, Hammond Road, let's see, is this my right one? 94019. 94019. So it'll zoom here and don't have any sea level rise risks this far in. I don't even know, did I do the correct? Yeah, I did do. Well, I'm even out of San Mateo County. I chose the wrong address, my apologies. Higgins Canyon. Okay, so I'll pull up an address on the next layer. So if you zoom in and out, you're able to see this is the inland layer of the sea level rise, and then you've got all the coastal boundaries of the sea level rise. I'm going to go back through, and I won't go through each one, but we have each of the hazards available where you're able to go through and go in and out of the different hazard data. So I'll choose flood. So this is the FEMA flood layers, and it's looking at the 100-year flood and the 500-year flood. And again, it identifies the different sources that was used to define the different flood hazard data. So if you remember in Rob's presentation, he talked through, okay, so first we identify what hazards we're going to assess, and then we identify the different exposures based on property, people, and economics. And so we come back to our tool, and the next link that you can look at is this hazard exposure dashboard. So what this does is take all those same hazard layers that you just looked at, and you can come in, you can say, okay, I want to go look at sea level rise. I'm going to turn on my sea level rise layer. I'm going to turn on both my sea level rise layers. And then I'm going to go pick a planning area. So I want to look at Belmont. Okay, so now I want to go pick a hazard. I'm going to pick, let's see, sea level rise. So what this tool does is it gives you the results that are on paper in part 2 of the draft hazard mitigation plan, but you're able to interactively turn on and off the different planning areas per hazard to say, okay, so Belmont has approximately almost 3,000 people that are exposed to the sea level rise hazard. The number of structures that are exposed, 734, which equates to almost $800 million of potential impact being exposed. And so again, how you would change if you wanted to look at another jurisdiction, keep sea level rise, you would choose Burlingame, and that would give you that information. You could choose, you can keep that layer on. It's not dependent of turning the layers on and off, so you can keep as many layers as you want, but you could choose, I want to look at a combined dam failure area. I'll go ahead and turn off my sea level rise. So this is our combined dam failure area. And again, you could find the details back on the first page that I showed you to show you the different source data that was used to define dam failure. So I'm going to go change. I'm going to show you dam failure. So for Burlingame, these are the results that were identified for what is properties, people, and economics that are exposed to dam failure inundation. There's a little bit of a descriptor down here to say how to use the dashboards. But again, this is well defined, saying 3 different steps to go in and out of the different hazards. And I'm going to go back then to the main page. And so again, I'm going to kind of just keep doing a summary. We've got the individual hazards here. You can go review. You can then go to review the cumulative exposed properties, people, and economics to each of the hazards. And then we come, and Rob talked about doing risk ranking. So then this tool, what it does is bring you to say, it's a similar approach to the exposure tool, where you would go and you would say, okay, I want to select a planning area. Let's select Belmont again. And so the Belmont shows up, and what it does is it immediately says for Belmont, this is the range of risk for the quantitative hazards that we have assessed. So the highest hazards exposed for Belmont planning area is landslides. And we can go and we can turn on the different hazard layers if you'd like. So we could go and we could choose, actually landslide's not a great one because it's a really big file. So just so you know, when you do choose this, sometimes it takes a little bit to load. I'm gonna choose the earthquake, San Andreas Peninsula. So here you go, so you can choose this layer. You can look at this icon right here is a legend. So then you can come and you can see, okay, so what do all these different colors mean? And then you can look over to say, okay, so which hazards are the biggest risk to Belmont? And then the range here is in the x-axis. It says less than 15 is low risk, between 15 and 32 is medium risk, and greater than 32 is high risk. And then there's a description of what each one of those equates to: high risk, medium ranked, or low ranked. And again, the methodology that was used to define all of the risk ranking is all in part 2 of the hazard mitigation plan. So this tool was developed to be a supplementary tool that you're able to understand how the process was undertaken to evaluate the exposure, to evaluate the risk, but then to be able to see how it affects you. Okay, so I'm going to go back again to the main page, and I'm going to go to the hazard mapping tool. So what the hazard mapping tool does is it allows you can come here, you can stay on the page if you want, or you can hit this little button right here that pops it out to be a full screen. And what you can do here is turn on and off all the different layers. So if you scroll over these icons at the top, you'll see that we've got dam failure. And then you can come and you can say, I want to look at all dam failure areas. I actually want to see where the jurisdictional dams are. I want to see, where the areas are most socially vulnerable. And then as you click on each one of these, you can also see a legend that provides it. But then you could also come up here and you can see a legend as well here if you click this layer. So what this is doing is showing you this dam failure area is a combined inundation area of all these different dam failure areas. And again, you can keep all these layers on if you'd like, again, to answer the question, I think, that Nancy asked. And then you could go and say, well, I want to see where the biggest risk is for earthquakes. And then I want to see where we've got risk for liquefaction, and come in here and, where are knee herp soils? And again, you can expand each of these arrows to get what the legends are, if you'd like. There is a good function here if you have interest in wanting to print this map for any purposes. You could go here, you could just hit the print button, And you've got options whether you want it to be a PDF or GIF or PNG or TIFF, or however you want to produce your outputs. And you've got options also to play a little bit with how you want the scales, et cetera, for the map extent. And then you just hit print, and that's a nice function. So again, and so this tool, what it also allows you to do, similar to, let's see, we've got a base map here. You can switch on and off the different base maps as well. So you're able to come in here, and if you want to see street names or any of that information, you can see. Okay, and let me see, if you want, you can say, where is my location? Well, that's so silly. I'm in Lawrence, Kansas, so that was a silly function. But if anybody wants to put in the chat function, if anybody wants to put in an address, I can put in an address for you, and I can come back to one of these tools and zoom in and search and look to see where your hazards are. And so that in a nutshell, really, you know, if you have any questions on where the hazard data came from, how it was assessed, information, that's all in part 2 of the plan. And this allows you to be able to interactively zoom in and out and understand the exposure values, as well as the risk ranking for each of the community areas. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I'll turn it over back to you, Rob, or open it up for question and answers.
I believe we're going to Q&A, right, Ann?
Great, yes, and an address just came in. Do we have to look at that really quick?
Yes.
And then we do have a number of
can.
questions that I've been tallying up for Rob. So I thought once we do that, I will read those.
Okay, so we've got an address. Does somebody want to say which hazard they want to look at specifically? Or do you just give me an address and I'll pick a hazard?
So sea level rise and flood, and then are you ready for the address?
Yes, I'm ready.
1956 Pescadero Creek Road.
Is that with a P?
Yeah, Pescadero 0 O. Pescadero.
Yeah.
ERO.
There it is.
No, that's not
ERO?
it. It's ERO.
Thank you.
Yes,
Sorry.
it's it below.
Okay. That's good. Okay. So zoom out. Okay, so we've got sea level rise. So this property is right on the periphery of the sea level rise inundation area. And so here's our point. And then we've got our data layers here.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So we can, there was a question about being able to overlap hazards on the tool. Is that possible to put more than one hazard at the same time?
Yeah, so on this tool, on all tool, I mean, on the individual hazard layers, we only have those specific hazards, but on the hazard mapping tool and the hazard exposure tool, you can load as many hazards as you possibly want on here. So we've got, again, I kind of don't want to hit the landslide because it's such a big file, but it works. So I'm going to load sea level rise and sea level rise. Let me go back. Okay, so if you go and you hit this legend right here, you'll see all the different layers that are currently turned on. So we've got sea level rise, we've got dam failure, we've got earthquake, herb soil, social vulnerability, et cetera.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now I'll transition to questions for Rob. Going back into the chat, we had a question from Kathleen. Do you know whether or not FEMA's approval of the plan constitutes a federal action subject to NEPA, i.e. will FEMA need to prepare an environmental assessment or an EIS?
Yeah, the short answer to that is no, because the federal action is the once they apply for the grant for which this applies to. So when they apply for a grant for funding for which the plan authorizes or makes you eligible for, that has to beat NEPA, but this is considered a categorically exempt NEPA process. And the same goes for state as far as CEQA. So that's been the official stance from FEMA.
So the next question is from Christine. What is the process when members of the public disagree with the information shared by our municipality?
Well, my advice is to go to your municipality. If it's hazard extent and location data or something relevant to a hazard, I mean, once again, a lot of our data sources are non-local sources, right? So we're using state or federal data or maybe county data. So if it's about a hazard extent and location, I think you have to look at what the source of the data is. I'll use flood mapping. FEMA flood mapping has been highly controversial for years. There are people that don't want to be in a flood zone. There are people that want to be in a flood zone. But if it's about a policy or something relevant to your jurisdiction, like a land use plan or a code or an ordinance, or even an implementation action that's not in the plan that you feel that you need to reach out to your jurisdiction. And I will tell you if you go to each jurisdictional annex in volume 2, you will see right up front the designated point of contact that's been set up for that jurisdiction for this mitigation plan. And that's where I would start, is go to that point of contact. And, I'm not saying that point of contact may be able to resolve it for you, but that's the starting point as far as it contains anything that's in this plan.
And then Rob, this is Ann. Then also another avenue you have available is they can submit a comment and any material, and then we'll share that with the appropriate planning partner.
Yeah, great point, Ann. And we've already gotten several comments already submitted through the SurveyMonkey that were direct to a community, and we've just forwarded them on to the community. And I think there's several cases the community has already responded. So that's, as far as providing comment on something that's in the plan at this stage of the game, that's the best way to do that.
Great. So then the next question, also from Kathleen, I wanted to see if you had anything else to add to this. Climate change has rendered historical frequencies, e.g. of 100-year floods, less useful in predicting future frequencies. Does the plan take this into account?
That awesome question. Here's the problem. The terminology 100-year flood is statutory, right? When I say statutory, the terminology for 100-year flood is based upon the federal law that created the National Flood Insurance Program. And a 100-year flood is not a flood that happens once every 100 years. It is a 1% annual chance flood. And by law, FEMA cannot map future conditions. These plans, at a minimum, were required to use FEMA mapping because of the scope of the National Flood Insurance Program. So FEMA is not going to generate a map that shows future conditions. It is possible to adjust the hydrology on a flood study to reflect future conditions, but it's pretty rare that data exists in an extent and location map that would either supplement or augment a FEMA map. So the short answer to the question is no, this plan does not take into account an adjusted hydrograph for future conditions. And the reason being is because of the limitations of the FEMA mapping program under the National Flood Insurance Program. I do think in the future that is going to change. There's a lot of pressure on FEMA right now from the Biden administration to really embrace, climate change in its programs. But right now, that is not a requirement. B, data on a countywide scale that would apply to everybody that reflects a future condition hydrology as far as an adjusted hydrograph for climate change projections is not readily available. I know of one model, the EPA sustained model, but it doesn't generate a 100-year or 1% annual chance floodplain. It generates a watershed-based model that doesn't give us a 100-year floodplain with depth and velocity. So long-winded answer, but the short answer is no, this does not.
Great, thank you. So another question we received from Ann Schneider is, how does the risk get measured against actual hazard that has happened?
Well, it's a factor, right? So one of the factors in ranking risk is probability of occurrence. So how often has it occurred, or is it likely to occur? So we always weight to historical experience to establish the frequency. So if you have good historic record of a lot of events, that overrides probabilistic record. But in some cases, we don't have data, and that's when you have to rely on mapping and modeling, such as an earthquake or, in some cases flood, the probabilistic mapping. So historic occurrence has a huge impact. Now, the one problem is we don't always have clearly defined extent and location of historic occurrence events. So for example, FEMA, when they do a flood map, they're using a historic hydrograph, right? So they're looking at stream flow, historic stream flow, and they're taking the mean of historic observed flow conditions, but it's not based upon, the historic extent. They use a model to map that extent. Fire is, pretty good, but where we have what we call historic fire perimeter data. Unfortunately, the fire perimeter data is not a factor in how they create fire severity zones, at least Cal Fire's fire severity zone data. So we're using the historic occurrence to justify the probability. How often does it account? And you look at the risk ranking formula, the frequency of the event is a multiplier. So the more frequent event, the higher the multiplier. So I think with the risk ranking formula that we're using in this plan, we do a good job of recognizing historic occurrence.
Thank you. So I'll read the question that just came in the chat. Christine said, can you explain the data sources for landslides? For example, Pacifica had a study done after the 1982 storms where we had 475 landslides that led to 3 deaths. The report says USGS maps are not adequate for the type of superficial debris flow landslides we are susceptible. Do the new studies include these types of landslides?
Well, keep in mind, we're generating a plan that covers 35 jurisdictions in an entire county. And we always know that there is better site-specific data, but site-specific data does not apply to the whole. So we are really forced on a multi-jurisdictional scope plan to utilize data sets that literally are available for the entire planning area. So for landslide, we're using a combination of California Geologic Survey and USGS, and a combination of looking at what we call slope soils, and then trying to map historic landslide perimeters that comes from the California Geologic Survey. Is it all inclusive of all landslide activity in the county? No. But it's the best data we have that's county-wide that could be regionally applied to everybody. And so I will tell you that in the risk ranking formula, we told every planning partner they are not bound by the quantitative metrics of the mapping and analysis that we did. We said if you qualitatively know that the quantitative data is not accurate, you can qualitatively override the risk ranking. So if you know you have landslide activity, and this is where we really rely on the local people, if they know they have a landslide problem and my risk ranking says your landslide risk is low, you absolutely have the authority to override the quantitative data with qualitative knowledge. I don't know that in the city of Pacifica, did they do that? I can tell you when you look at the risk ranking and you go to the risk ranking tables in each jurisdictional annex, you will probably see a difference, because you could actually recreate the score. And if you look at the quantitative data that's in the landslide vulnerability assessment tables in chapter, I think the landslide chapter is 9 or 10 in a chapter, you're probably going to get a different answer than you might see in a jurisdictional annex, because that's what we told everybody. If you have data or local knowledge that supersedes that, we always defer to the local knowledge. So, but in the spatial analysis, we are kind of, forced to look at data sets that cover the entire planning area. And that is a challenge when we're doing a large scale multi-jurisdictional plan. We're not going to have a lot of that really detailed data for everybody.
I think I read through all the unanswered questions in the chat that we hadn't gotten to.
Okay.
I'm just looking to pause for a minute to see if there's any additional questions coming in. Great questions.
Yeah, these are really good questions.
Yeah, another question. Have the new, I think this one was one that we missed, so thanks for reposting it. Mayor Schneider asks, are the new FEMA tsunami maps, have they been incorporated? I can scroll back up to the full question.
FEMA tsunami maps? I'm not aware of FEMA tsunami maps. I mean, FEMA takes into account tsunami when they create a flood map.
I think
We are
this is
using the California,
the newest maps that have come out in California that show much more substantial flooding on the Bayside, especially in Millbrae and Burlingame. And then the comment is Millbrae in the dock has low tsunami risk, but does that drive with the newest data? So
we are using the most recent Cal OES sanctioned tsunami data that was generated by the University of Southern California for the entire state. I can't tell you the exact date of that data set, but the metadata is cited in the tsunami chapter. So we rely on Cal OES for that data, and so that's the data we're using.
So it sounds like the new data might just be a few weeks old. And there was a request for a link in the chat to that data set.
Oh, yeah. I mean, keep in mind, we did our risk analysis, and got all the data that we did for our risk analysis about 6 months ago. So unfortunately, if data comes out after we do our analysis, and we're not gonna, we don't have the ability to throttle chase. So that's something that we want to take note of, right, through the planned maintenance process that Ann will be talking about, and set the table for the next update that, there is more current tsunami data.
And if there's no other comments, is that our transition to our maintenance plan presentation? I'll give it.
That was a good segue, wasn't it, Ann?
Yeah, very good. Okay. Well, we will have an opportunity at the end, but we've got about 15 minutes left for this meeting. So we did want to give you all a preview about what is going to happen next. The purpose of today's meeting is really to drill into the draft, but part of the draft is our plan maintenance strategy, and we wanted to make sure that you were aware of that so that you could also comment on that section. So as a part of our plan maintenance has three major elements and a fourth reporting element. So we have, because we're a multi-jurisdictional plan, we have county-wide mitigation actions, and I'll go through those. And those are actions that are going to benefit all of our planning partners. We also, within the multi-jurisdictional plan, as Rob explained, we have individual chapters for every one of our planning partners. And all of those planning partners have their own mitigation actions. For both of this, we are going to be developing work plans and implementation plans so that we know that all of this work that we've done in planning will actually show up boots on the ground. We also, as Dan previously discussed, we have a strong commitment to continuing to ensure the equitable participation that we were able to develop during the planning process. And finally, there's a strong commitment to an annual reporting structure. The annual report will be delivered to the Board of Supervisors in a public forum each year, and the annual report will include a number of the reports from all of our planning partners. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about these elements. We have, for the countywide mitigation actions, a commitment to continue to maintain a multilingual and culturally appropriate website. So the tool that you just saw that Cindy showed us, that tool, that's the beginning. We're going to continue to move forward, and we'll have information on our website about hazard mitigation work that's continuing throughout the county. We're going to continue to leverage all of our multi-jurisdictional efforts. The county has a strong commitment to support and enhance our regional education and awareness programs. Dan talked previously about Zone Haven and making them more available and accessible to all the members of our community. And finally, the county, our third mitigation, 3 of 6 mitigation actions, we have a strong commitment to provide the technical support and coordination to really aggressively go after the grant funding opportunities that this plan makes us eligible for. We also, as a part of our mapping tool, we also are going to continue to develop a standardized GIS data set, and we'd like to start to put in some of that historical data, that lost data, things that we just discussed in the question about Pacifica, so that in the future, everybody knows how to find that information, where it is, and it's available. And we already have a number of our partners using the data that we've developed in this plan for things like their safety elements and their housing elements. So we really think this plan is going to live beyond just its life as a LHMP. We also are going to start a business outreach program so that we can, in the same way that we did the outreach to our community members, we want to make sure that we develop a way to start doing this early mitigation planning with our business community to maintain the economic viability of our community during times that are difficult to do business in, like the CZU fire. And finally, we'd like to develop model policy templates to assist all of our planning partners with new policies, new procedures. So those are our county-wide mitigation actions. They should benefit everyone. Just a little bit more about one of those, which is the grant coordination. Beginning this month and going through September and probably even into October, the FEMA BRIC grant process opens up. And so we have a commitment to working with our planning partners to increase the grant competitiveness of our regional partnership, and on an ongoing basis, continue to identify projects and coordinate grant and other funding opportunities so that we can leverage the work that we've done here and, again, boots on the ground, make this plan into a very actionable document. With respect to our annex partners, to all of the people who have participated in this planning process, through our contract with Tetra Tech, we are going to be providing a tool and training so that they can track their mitigation actions. The tracking process then will result in that annual report that I spoke about earlier. And as part of that, we're going to be hosting biannual meetings with the partners and probably more frequently than that, some training opportunities where we'll do some status check-ins. We'll talk about funding and grant application, and we'll do some updates and training on a variety of topics, including how we can reach out on an equitable basis to members of our community and do it in concert with our planning partners. As Dan mentioned earlier, we intend to continue the engagement with community members, and we are committed to continuing the engagement with our CBO partners. We have, just using the county as an example, in the unincorporated county annex, we have 36 mitigation actions. We're going to be developing a work plan for each of those actions. And as we develop that more detailed work plan, we'll be identifying those opportunities where we will be going out and asking our community-based partners to work with us to ensure that we do it right. And Dan earlier mentioned the Zone Haven and that's an opportunity where he sees future work with our CBO partners. And finally, beginning next year, when we will have a one-year-old plan, we will develop a coordinated multi-jurisdictional annual report. That report will include updates from all our planning partners, and the report will be delivered in a variety of public forums. The county, of course, is committing to delivering it to our Board of Supervisors, and we'll be working with our planning partners to make sure that that material is available so that it can be delivered to their boards in their public forums, however they deem that to be the most appropriate. So that's a preview. We are very excited about having the draft plan done. I will tell you that we're already starting to work within the county management structure to put together the implementation framework. And so there's a strong commitment to not just doing this plan, but also living the plan and working the plan. So with that, if there's any questions, I wasn't able to monitor the chat while I was doing the
We
presentation.
had a question come in asking for the tsunami data, and I'm actually not familiar exactly where that is online. So I have my assistant here with me now. So I posted a chat and answer to that. Let me see if I have any additional questions come in. I don't see any hands up or any additional questions.
All right, great. Well, give you all another moment if you think of any. If not at this time, feel free. I've submitted several links here, but you can always find us just by Googling San Mateo County LHMP. It'll take you to our website. My contact information is there. You're welcome, as we said, to submit your comments via the SurveyMonkey tool, or if it's easier, through our MJLHMP email address, which is posted on our website. So with that, I'll take over Hillary since since her daughter has decided to participate here. I'll take over the last of the facilitation role and just say thank you, everyone, for participating. We've been very, very impressed. It's been very hard during COVID, but you know, there's some benefits to Zoom. We've had a lot of very good active participation and from all over the county. And we thank you all for taking the time. So we will sign off.
Great. Thank you, everyone.